Hello, I'm Tony Guida, and this is My New York. We begin today's program with a quiz. What is the New York connection among these performers? James Gandolfini, Edie Falco, Joan Rivers, Holly Hunter, Carole King, Julianne Moore. Think about it. The answer will surprise you. We asked you what these six famous people have in common: Gandolfini, Falco, Rivers, Hunter, King, and Moore. The answer is each has performed on the tiny stage of a cozy theater in a basement on West 42nd Street. And when that place was called Downstairs at the West Bank Café, it had a playwright-in-residence. And I'm delighted he's in residence with us today. Louis Black, welcome.
Thanks, Tony.
Playwright-in-residence. That really sounds highfalutin.
It does. It's very impressive.
And what was the reality?
The reality is that I was working with two other friends, and one was the artistic director of this space, and the other was the director that was Rand Forrester. Rusty McGee was the composer, and I was a playwright. So I gave myself my own title. So I was there. I was in residence. In reality, we called ourselves the West Bank Café Downstairs Theater Bar, and it was a bar in a 100-seat theater. And I was its resident playwright.
Well, before we talk about some of the playwrights, I want to introduce the owner of the West Bank Café, Steve Olsen. When did you open this place?
The restaurant, the West Bank Café, opened June 29th, 1978.
Who's keeping track? I mean.
Right.
And the theater in the basement followed shortly after.
A year later.
Why? Why would you build a theater?
Well, I had a lot of friends who were actors, and were on Theater Row, which was a brand new street at the time. It's actually 42nd between 9th and 10th. But it was recently called Theater Row, and there were 10 theaters across the street. And I had the space. I built out the space. And I wanted to do shows. So we did it.
And you did one act, as I understand it. You were the impresario of the one act.
Yes.
I get the sense from having talked to both of you guys that it was sort of a desperation about this. I mean, in terms of, not that there weren't actors who wanted to act and wasn't material you guys perhaps wanted to perform, but to get people to come to the both the theater and the restaurant, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, any act of theater is an act of desperation. Anytime.
Good description.
You are going to get a group of people up, and they're going to create a reality for other people to see, be it either like by a master by, the name of, like Ibsen or Chekhov, or just some schmuck who got a degree from wherever. It's always an act of desperation. So he was always trying to find an audience, but we were trying to find an audience on 42nd Street at a time in which, as Steve will tell you.
It was Siberia, right?
It was Siberia. It was probably the lowest point in the history of 42nd Street, because when Manhattan Plaza opened up and Theater Row opened up at the same time, that was the nucleus for what would, the beginning of what would turn around the Times Square and the Hell's Kitchen area. So we were there first.
Yeah. And as I understand it, though it was Siberia and it was tough getting people to come, the customers, paying customers to come, there was no shortage of actors wanting to perform, right? Why was that?
Well, because if you said you were going to do a show of synchronized swimming in the East River at that point in time with actors, and they were going to get $3.50 an hour, they would have braced, because there was really, at that point in time, theater was at a really low point in New York City, and there was not a lot on Broadway. Broadway was kind of had not really made any kind of a comeback. So when you look at like the New York Times, which is which has the box scores, which theaters, now it's about this big. At that point, it was this big. There weren't a lot of off Broadway. There was still kind of a thriving off Broadway scene, but there were but you had an influx of actors coming into New York on a yearly basis who had no place to perform, and so. It was not tough for us to to put out the word that we were going to do 2 new one acts a week.
2 a week?
Yeah, 2 new ones a week. But we just did. It was no. We didn't care about set. We didn't care about costumes. Keep it as simple as possible. Roll it in, roll it out. 3 shows.
You remember some of them?
Of course, the one that comes immediately to mind is one that I don't really want to talk about because it was just a catastrophe. We almost had a fire.
Oh, we'd love to talk about catastrophe.
No, but we almost had a fire. We sat in the back. It was called Guilty Philosopher, and there was seriously. And it
now, is this one you wrote, or you just?
No, we brought this in, and
at great expense.
At great expense, and some of the times, we really didn't know what we were getting. You don't really know until you put it on, and we certainly didn't know there would be. Here's a word you rarely hear, except on the CUNY TV, would be pipettes. So there are 12 pipettes, which you'll remember from your chemistry class.
I'm not even sure what a pipette.
A pipette is a glass thing with a little hookah thing there, and it's filled with. Filled it with an oil that burns. So. Right. They would be singing this song, Guilty, Guilty Philosopher, and then they would turn a pipette on and start flaming. So at one point we had 12 flames.
And the sprinkler system was right there.
And the sprinklers right above it. We stood in the back, and we just went, should we get Steve downstairs to see what we do next if there is a fire?
Right. Or if there is a next.
Right. I'm trying to make the connection between a guilty philosopher and pipettes, but maybe I shouldn't try.
No, don't go there.
No.
We should have tried to make the connection earlier.
And did you perform? Were you
on
the boards?
I was the host of literally every show. I introduced every show that came in.
And that was 7 nights a week.
Yeah, it was every night, and it was 2 shows a night. So, and I would basically warm the audience up. Because at that point I'd been doing stand-up for on and off. I didn't see myself as a stand-up, but I saw somebody myself who could give the appearance of being a stand-up. And so I was warming them up and then also telling people what was coming up. And also making the appeal, especially early on, we're looking for material.
Why did, I know you have a degree in playwriting from Yale.
Yeah.
Why even try stand-up? What? I mean, you wanted to be a playwright, but I guess what? You thought it was.
Well, it was the fastest way to get. You write plays, you hand them to somebody, they don't read them, or it takes months, years. You can send all the ones you want out, but the fastest way you can get your writing out there is through stand-up. And I was fascinated by the craft and the people who did it, and it was a way in which. And I wanted to try it, and it was a way in which I realized I could write stuff and get it up and find out how it worked, rather than wait around to see if they liked, one of the plays.
Before we go further with the plays, was it working? Did it work? Did it bring people?
Yeah. When I opened up the restaurant and a year later opened up the club, I went through a lot of booking agents. We booked a lot of different kinds of shows, cabaret. We did a jazz series. We did a rock series. And it's a difficult business. It's you're in it for the love. You're not in it for the money because there really isn't much. And then when I met Lewis and Rand Forrester and Rusty McGee, and we had a meeting, and about doing the one acts. It was something I really thought would be different, and it would tie into what was going on Theater Row. It would include the performers and the directors and the writers that were being produced on Theater Row. And so we went with it. And it's always a struggle to get an audience. We had a lot of shows where we would call up at people and just have them come in because we wanted them to see what we were working on. And that's basically, the grassroots phone calls were what brought people in. And, of course, everybody hung out and drank and hung out and ate afterwards.
It became a club.
It became a club, that's right.
Which, in a certain way, it still is. I mean, you can walk into the West Bank any night. I mean, the other night I was in there and I saw Teller.
Right.
Of Penn and Teller.
Yeah.
And was charmed by the fact that I actually heard him speak for the first time.
I don't even know if you're allowed to say that.
No, well, maybe I'm not. And if I'm not, contact our lawyers. Who were some of the writers? I mean, I understand some folks who went on to become pretty famous.
We had Alan Ball, who went on to write American Beauty and
6 Feet.
6 Feet Under.
6 Feet Under.
Yeah, and then there was
he had an improv, not an improv.
He had an improv
troupe.
He had an improv comedy troupe called the Alarm Dog Rep. That he wrote sketches for and did some acting in, and then he also wrote some one-acts. We really were one of the first places that ever did his work, and then we were truly the first place that ever did the work of Aaron Sorkin, who we all know from The West Wing now, and who's actually given us credit as the place that really gave him his break. And
what kind of stuff was Sorkin writing in those days? For that stage.
Well, he had written, it wasn't really for our stage. I mean, it was by an accident. I mean, he needed to get a play done, or his parents were going to kick his ass and tell him he couldn't be writing plays anymore. And he was working, I think, as an usher at that time on Broadway.
I think he was a bartender.
Or a bartender, yeah. And he said that he wanted to get... Somebody came to him and said, there's a place, I can get your play done. And this was a director who now directs at the George Street Theater, who was the artistic director there, David Saint. So David Saint brought the play to us. David had done work for us. He gave it to us. It was a very, very funny play about they're filming a war movie in like a Vietnam Apocalypse Now type of war movie. And it was a comedy. And within a few days of doing it, it was very funny, and I believe it's something. Well, the agent showed up. It was, I think, Sam Cohn. I'm not sure, and big agent, big agent. The big agent grabs him, and then within a year and a half, A Few Good Men by Aaron goes to Broadway.
We did his first two plays. One was called Oregon, and then the other one, I believe, was called Hidden in This Picture.
Hidden in This Picture. Very good.
Yeah.
You must have been studying last year.
When are we talking about? The 80s, right?
Early 80s.
Early 80s, yeah.
Do you remember anything about either of those plays?
About both of the plays, sure, yeah. Aaron's a great writer. I mean, we've done, how many plays? 1,000?
Something like that, 896.
It's all documented. Yeah. And this may sound a little hype, but most of them were very good. There was the angry. No, I'm saying, when you do that kind of volume, but there is so much talent in this.
Here's the thing with it: if the script wasn't good, the acting was really good. Mm-hmm. If the acting wasn't great, the script was good. What we allowed people who were actors to direct. We allowed directors who kind of wanted to write, if they had something that they wanted to write, to get that out there. And what it allowed was finally, somewhere within there's a whole madness that is theater, a place for people to get, by being able to do that, learn, become better at what their real the craft that they wanted to follow was.
And we never held auditions.
No.
Ever.
Whoever came.
If you had a play, you could drop it off with us, and we could either handle the production for you. But most of the times, it was actor produced or writer produced, where we'd read a play and want to book it, and then it would really come self-contained. They'd already cast it and just bring it in. We'd slot it.
Yeah.
So it was fertile ground.
Yeah, it was absolutely. It was. So you had people like we had this play. I wasn't sure about the play, but we finally decided to do the play because the person had been somebody that had been worked out of one of the theaters we knew well, and the Ensemble Studio Theater, and we said, okay, we'll do this. We'll do the play. But James Gandolfini shows up at this play. Right. And I don't know if it was his...
Something he had written, or
no,
something he had just...
It was acting in. And it's he'd been cast in it, and he was... he made it. It was remarkable because you kind of went, wow, what was amazing down there is you knew. Somebody came in.
Well, this is, but I mean, just in case the audience isn't keeping up with us here, this was James Gandolfini long before he was James Gandolfini.
This is James Gandolfini when he was, going, oh boy, you're going to give me a sandwich afterwards. James Gandolfini. Right.
What was the play? Do you remember?
I don't remember the play.
I remember
the author was Marcia Haufrecht.
Marcia Haufrecht. Oh. She directed.
I can only remember so much.
Yeah.
Your name is...
Word Carr. For a little tribute to Bob Elliott. Let me take a minute and talk about the restaurant, because there's a wonderful story you told me about. I mean, part of this, in addition to providing fertile ground and needed ground for performers to perform, it was a way to try to get customers in the restaurant, place where people didn't really want to go in those days, 42nd and 9th. And tell me that story that changed things, the Mimi Sheridan story.
Well, she reviewed the restaurant.
Well, first, you're not doing any business, right?
When I opened the West Bank Café, I think from day one we lost $2 or $3 grand a week for a year and a half.
That's considerable.
I was 24 years old. I didn't even consider it.
What are you doing? Mortgaging your house, or you're maxing your credit card?
We were no, neither. We were just running up the tab, and nobody wanted to rent space in that building, in that area, on that block. So I was never really concerned about getting evicted for non-payment of rent because they couldn't rent the stores next door. And they never bought Manhattan Plaza. Never bothered me for the rent. They knew what they were up against trying to rent the commercial spaces.
So you're losing $2,000-3,000 a week,
right?
And it goes on for 52, 70, 80 weeks.
It goes on for about it goes on until February 6th, 1980, and that's when Theater Row officially opened up. And the Friday, which was the weekend edition of the Times, and it had the food and the theater edition in it as one section. And Mel Gussow did a big story about Theater Row opening up and all the theaters that were across the street from us. And Mimi Sheridan covered the restaurants that were in the area, and we were the premier restaurant. And we got a 2-star review.
From Mimi
Sheridan.
In those days.
Very good.
Yeah,
sure. It was a coveted review. We wiped out our $160,000 debt in 6 months.
Wow.
It was insane. It was great. People were coming in. There was one thing she noted, that if the onion soup comes out tepid, send it back and they'll warm it up. For a year and a half, people came in, every customer came in with the New York Times review and said, make sure the soup is hot. The one time it was not hot. It was sensational.
So Ben Brantley or whoever, Frank Rich or whoever was the Times theater critic in those days, can make or break a play, or could in those days, and Mimi could make or break a restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we were stunned when we got it. She started calling, fact-checking, and the review came out, and everything changed.
Yeah, this restaurant was so cutting edge at that point in time that it had a dessert cart. Rarely seen, except on the Upper East Side of New York at that time.
What were you thinking, Steve?
My friends were leaving, and they'd yell from the front, "It's okay if I take the chocolate-covered strawberry?" I'm like, what am I going to do with it now? Put it down, and we'll resell it.
I can't imagine.
And Louis used to mention it before every show. Make sure you look at the dessert cart. It's my latest idea.
Yeah, didn't you just bop him over the head with it and say, Steve, what are you doing with it?
No, it was great. Every so often he would just come up with something that was spectacular. I would announce on stage that, if they stayed around after the play was done, that Steve would come down and give them the specials for next week.
I should mention that today the theater is and has been named for a while is the Laurie Beechman Theatre. Why?
Well, Lori Beachman was an extraordinarily gifted singer. She was in, what was it, Cats, Jesus Christ.
Everything.
The Technicolor coat. The Technicolor coat guy.
Right.
Joseph.
He'd done a ton of stuff.
And a lot of Andrew Lloyd Webber's.
And she was very much of one of Andrew Lloyd Webber's stars, and performed at the White House when the Clintons were there, and she was.
She sang at our place.
She sang it at the West Bank a lot, and was married to a very, very close friend of ours, Neil Mazzella, and as a result of that,
Well, what happened was after we had concluded 896 plays, at that point the room was in desperate need of a renovation. It was pretty much worn down from the traffic, and I shut the place, the room down to renovate. And Lori, for years, had been battling ovarian cancer.
Yeah. And
in the middle of our renovations, she'd passed away. And also Neil Mazzella was our general contractor. So being we were down and she passed away, and we always called it the Downstairs Theater Bar, I decided to name it after her in her honor, so she wouldn't be forgotten. And as Lewis said, it kind of raises the bar of your expectations, knowing that her name's on it. And if anybody brings in a show that you really don't want to do, you could just always blame it on Lori.
Lori said,
Lori wouldn't want to do it.
Lori wouldn't have, and Lori wouldn't have done it.
I at the top, I mentioned 6 actors and performers who have been on this stage. We talked about Gandolfini.
I thought the answer was they were or wanted to be Jewish. That was what I thought the answer was.
That's close.
It's close.
That's close. I would have gotten you 2 weeks in Philadelphia. Edie Falco apparently sang there.
Yeah.
She acted.
Acted. Joan Rivers, in recent years, was there every Wednesday night doing her shtick, right?
Yeah, Joan came to us 5 years before she left us when she died. Joan was looking. She just won The Apprentice, and she was looking for a place, a laboratory, to work out new material, which is what we always considered the place to be, a place for young artists to work out new material, but also for seasoned artists as well. Mm-hmm. And so we booked her for one night, and it was great. And it went, as she got off stage, she claimed it was the room she'd been searching for her whole life. And she came up and had dinner with us. And then she went on to do 200 shows over a 5-year period. And she did her last show the night before she went in for her surgical procedure.
Right. So. Louis, I wanted to get back to something you said earlier, which is that you were the host, you were the playwright-in-residence. And but you were doing some stand-up, and eventually that, I guess, took precedence, and we know, this is your act. And I'm wondering, how did that evolve? And was it something? Were you able to overcome your stage fright, which I think you've talked about?
Yeah, the transition took place there. I had worked. I had always, from the time I came to New York, I would just find a space for free, or a space that I could use for practically nothing, and invite my friends to watch me do stand up, and that was it. And I was not, and I also had worked at on a regular basis at some places around D.C. where I was near where I was born and raised, and but I wasn't doing it regularly, and you have to do it. You got to be consistent. You got to really do it 5, 6, 7 nights a week when you're learning it. And so, what the West Bank allowed is that I could get up, and by hosting, there's no expectation of laughter. I could learn to relax on stage, and then by having that thing of they don't really expect to laugh, then I could start going boom, 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 and getting the laugh. And then every Saturday, because our friends were so broke, and so were we, that we would have a show at midnight for free. And in part, it was in contrast to like Studio 54 at that time, which was like a $25, which is like $75 now, like a $25 cover fee. We had no fee. The only thing we said is you can come in, but it's free, so you can't heckle. We don't want to listen to you. And allowed our friend to come in, have drinks, and we would perform. And a number of actors that I knew wanted to do stand-up, or they would do sketches. Rusty McGee would do his music, and we had some folks who would do, sing, and I got to do 20 minutes.
I don't want to reveal trade secrets, and we only have about a minute left, but you're the sweetest man in the world, and yet your act is all about anger and rage. Now, which is it? What is it?
I mean, I can't really be like that, but I mean, certain things really tick me off. What it is that I'm, and it took a long time to learn this, I'm funniest when I'm angry, and I really am, and a lot of that comes from the family I was born and raised in, and that's when I'm funny, when I'm so apoplectic, you don't even know if I'm going to get to the next word, let alone live to the next word. And for some reason, audiences find that charming.
They do.
Yeah.
And to your credit, Louis Black, Steve Olsen, it's a delight to have you both here talking about a place that I think is a hidden gem of New York, and it's certainly, at least in the theater community. Maybe I'm not in the theater community, so maybe I don't really understand its place. But I thought our audience should know more about this terrific, nurturing space. Louis, Steve, thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
And we will see you next week.